You've been quiet now for a while. Maybe it's been weeks, maybe months, maybe even longer. And in that silence, something profound is happening that nobody has told you about. While you're out here doing the work, healing yourself, setting boundaries, moving forward, the person who avoided you is starting to experience something they've likely never felt before with such intensity. They're starting to see themselves, not in the way you've been trying to get them to see themselves through conversations, explanations, and desperate pleas for understanding, but in the way that only absence can reveal, in the mirror that your silence has become. You need to know this, because right now you might be sitting with a lot of doubt. You might be wondering if you made the right choice. You might be scrolling through old conversations at 2 a.m, replaying moments where you tried so hard to make them understand. And a part of you, maybe a big part, is wondering if your absence is actually changing anything at all, or if it's just making things worse, if you're just hurting them without them even realizing why. If your silence is just being met with more of their silence, their apathy, their ability to move on as if you never mattered at all. But I'm here to tell you something that is rooted in the actual psychology of avoidant attachment patterns. Your silence is doing something. It's doing something deep. It's creating a void where there used to be purpose, routine, and a familiar dynamic. And in that void, the avoidant person is finally, for the first time, beginning to notice the shape of what they've lost. They're beginning to notice the emptiness of the patterns they've relied on for so long. The silence they never expected. Avoidant individuals have spent their entire lives mastering a particular kind of relationship choreography. They learned early, usually in childhood, from caregivers who were emotionally unavailable, dismissive, or who made emotional intimacy unsafe, that the way to protect themselves is to pull away, to create distance, to minimize the importance of connections, to tell themselves that they don't really need anyone, that relationships are more trouble than they're worth, that vulnerability is weakness. These aren't conscious decisions they're making every day. These are survival mechanisms that became so wired into their nervous system that they feel like truth, like reality itself. And so they built a life around this architecture. They became the person who can leave you without looking back, the person who can ghost and feel nothing, the person who can be with you physically but a million miles away emotionally. They became skilled at the art of contradiction, saying they love you while pushing you away, asking you to stay while making the relationship uninhabitable, claiming they don't want commitment while expecting you to commit to waiting indefinitely. They became comfortable with the discomfort of others because their own discomfort was always their priority. What they didn't expect was for you to finally stop playing the game. For most of your relationship with this person, you were probably the one doing something. You were the one reaching out. You were the one initiating conversation. You were the one trying to fix the emotional distance. You were the one explaining your needs over and over again, hoping that if you just found the right words, the right tone, the right moment, they would finally get it. You were the one arranging your life around their emotional unavailability, making allowances for their coldness, accepting crumbs of affection like they were full meals. You were the one performing all the emotional labor that it takes to keep a connection alive with someone who is determined to keep it on life support. You were, in essence, the container for the relationship. You were the one holding the space. You were the one maintaining the narrative that this connection mattered, that this dynamic could eventually transform, that they would eventually change. You were the anchor that kept them from floating away entirely into their own emotional void. And then you stopped. This is where the psychology gets interesting. Because what you've done by going quiet, by stepping back, by finally taking yourself out of the equation, what you've done is remove the very mechanism that allowed them to continue avoiding themselves. You were, without meaning to be, their perfect avoidance partner. Your persistence meant they never had to look at their own patterns. Your hope meant they could always believe that someone else was the problem. Your trying meant they could always position themselves as the innocent party who was being too much upon. Your presence meant they never had to sit in the void that their own emotional architecture creates. But now you're gone. Or at least you're quiet. And the void is there, and it's undeniable. The void they cannot fill with their old tricks. When an avoidant loses their primary source of avoidance, something unprecedented happens. They suddenly don't have the familiar script to follow. They don't have the person coming toward them that they can push away. They don't have the emotional demand that allows them to position themselves as the reasonable one. They don't have someone else's pain to manage and minimize and frame as their problem. For the first time, they're sitting alone with their own emotional landscape, and that landscape is terrifying. See, Avoidant individuals have spent so long running from feeling that they don't even know what they're running from anymore. The feelings have a texture now, accumulated, layered, complex. There's the fear that drove the avoidance in the first place. There's the shame of having hurt someone who loved them. There's the discomfort of missing someone while also not knowing how to let them back in. There's the realization, which is just beginning to dawn, that maybe the problem wasn't you. Maybe the problem was always the way they relate to intimacy itself. And they can't use the old tricks to manage this. They can't call you and complain. They can't breadcrumb you with sporadic messages to keep you on standby. They can't rewrite the narrative in conversation, talking you in circles until you forget what you were asking for in the first place. They can't pull you closer just enough to get what they need and then push you away again. The familiar dance is no longer available to them. Some of them will try to fill the void with other things. New relationships, work, substances, distraction, a frantic attempt to create the same dynamic with someone else, only to find that they're still the same person carrying the same patterns. They'll realize that the problem follows them, because the problem is them, because it's not about you at all. It was never about you. But the void still has a pull. It's stronger than distraction because it's the absence of something real. It's the missing of you, not the missing of the idea of you, but the genuine absence of your presence in their life. And as time goes on, and this is the key part, they begin to associate that void with themselves, with their own choices, with the way they are. Not consciously, not immediately, but in those quiet moments when they're alone, in the moments when they can't deny anymore that you're not coming back, that you've actually let go. The peculiar psychology of being the one left behind. Here's something that almost nobody talks about, and I want you to understand it fully. Avoidant individuals, for all their talk of not needing anyone and not caring about relationships, are actually terrified of abandonment. It's the root of their avoidance in the first place. They learned that intimacy leads to abandonment, so they abandoned first. They created distance as a preemptive strike against being left. They told themselves they didn't care so that they wouldn't have to feel the pain of rejection. But the rejection they always feared, the abandonment they spent their entire lives trying to avoid, has finally happened. And it didn't happen the way they expected. It didn't happen with dramatics and fighting and them being proven right about how terrible relationships are. It happened quietly. It happened with you simply deciding that you deserve better, that you deserve to be with someone who can show up, that you deserve to stop begging for basic emotional availability. It happened with you choosing yourself. And that breaks something open in them, because you weren't supposed to leave. You were supposed to wait forever. You were supposed to keep trying. That was the script. In their internal narrative, if they pushed you hard enough, you would either break or you would leave dramatically, and then they could blame you for it. You would prove them right about love. You would validate all their worst beliefs about why relationships are inherently doomed. But you didn't do that. You left quietly. You left because you had to. You left because love isn't supposed to hurt this much. And in doing that, you didn't give them the narrative they needed. You didn't become the villain. You became the person who loved them enough to let them go. And that's so much harder for them to dismiss, to minimize, to twist into something that fits their story. What they're actually thinking, week by week in the silence. Now, I want to give you a glimpse into what's actually happening in the avoidant person's mind as the silence stretches on. This is important because it helps you understand that your absence is genuinely doing what you hope it is, even when you can't see evidence of it. Week 1 and 2, they might not even notice at first. Or they do notice, but they tell themselves it's fine, actually better. More space. That's what they wanted anyway, right? They're probably busier than usual, finding distractions, telling themselves a story about how you're probably overreacting, how you'll be back, how this is just your way of trying to get their attention. The silence at this stage is easy to dismiss, because the thought patterns aren't yet pointing inward. They're still aimed at you. This is still about your neediness, your inability to understand them, your problem. Weeks 3 and 4, there's a subtle shift. The busy work starts to feel hollow. They might reach out, a casual text, a like on your post, a comment that seems random but isn't. They're testing the waters, wondering if you'll respond, if you're missing them too. If you don't respond, there's a flash of something, hurt maybe, or surprise. Because usually you respond, usually you're there, the absence is starting to feel less like freedom and more like an irregularity in their world. They might blame you for being stubborn, but underneath that blame there's the faintest beginning of doubt. Month 2, The doubt is becoming harder to ignore. They're noticing things they didn't expect to notice. They're in a situation that would normally prompt them to vent to you, and you're not there. They see something that reminds them of you and have to actively suppress the urge to send it to you. They catch themselves wondering how you're doing, then immediately feel irritated with themselves for wondering. They're starting to have conversations with themselves about you. Justifications that feel less solid than they did before. The narrative that you were too needy is harder to maintain when they're the one reaching out to empty air. Month 3 and beyond, something more fundamental is shifting. The anger is still there, but underneath it is a grief that's becoming harder to deny. They're beginning to see the pattern. Maybe they're looking at their previous relationships for the first time, without the story they've been telling themselves about why those relationships ended. They're noticing that the same thing keeps happening, that they keep pushing people away. That the comfortable distance they so prize is actually loneliness. They might try a new relationship, hoping this time it will be different, only to find themselves doing the same things. The mirror is becoming clearer. They're starting to see themselves in it, and they don't like what they see. This progression isn't guaranteed. Some avoidant people are so defended that they never get here. But the ones who do are having a reckoning. And it's happening because you've given them the space to have it. Your silence is doing what all your words could never do. The slow, painful unraveling of denial. So what's actually happening now, in the silence, is that an avoidant person is beginning to unravel. They're beginning to see the thread of their own behavior across multiple relationships, multiple situations, multiple people who have tried to reach them and been rebuffed. They're beginning to see the pattern they always blamed on circumstances, or other people's neediness, or their own commitment phobia, or their lack of time, or their need for space. And they're having to sit with the possibility that it was them, that it was always them, that the distance they create is not a necessity but a choice, that the coldness they default to is not protection but sabotage. This doesn't happen overnight. The denial is powerful. The mind is creative in the ways it defends itself. For a while, they'll convince themselves that you're the problem, that you couldn't handle their need for independence, that you were too needy, too demanding, too much, that you didn't understand them, that if you loved them you would have waited, that you gave up too easily. They'll tell this story to themselves and to anyone else who will listen, and for a time, it might even feel true. But there's something about absence that is persistently honest. It doesn't argue back, it doesn't defend itself, it just is. And in that pure existence, it begins to wear down the elaborate architecture of justification that the avoidant person has built. Maybe it's 3 months in, and they see a song that reminds them of you, and instead of skipping it, they listen to it. Maybe it's 6 months, and they notice that they're not actually happy with this freedom they fought so hard for. Maybe it's a year, and they're looking at your social media and seeing that you've actually built a life, that you're actually healing, and realizing that they lost something real. That they lost the one person who tried. That they lost the one person who kept the door open even when they were pushing it shut. This is where the real shift begins. Not because they want to get you back, not because they suddenly want to fix things, but because they're finally beginning to see themselves without the distortion that your presence provided. Without your story to contradict, without your pain to minimize, without your trying to push against, they are left with their own truth. And their own truth is that they are someone who runs, someone who pushes away the people who love them, someone who chooses distance over vulnerability, someone who is terrified of the very thing they claim not to need. The mirror your silence created. What you've done by going quiet, by setting this boundary, by taking care of yourself and stepping away from trying to love someone who couldn't love you back. What you've done is create a mirror, not a mirror they wanted. Not a mirror that flatters them, but a mirror that is brutally honest. And in that mirror they're beginning to see themselves clearly, for perhaps the first time. They're seeing the ghost of your presence in every moment they expected you to reach out, and you didn't. They're feeling the weight of your absence, in a way that they probably never felt the weight of your presence, because they were always too busy pushing it away. They're noticing that the reasons they gave for the distance, that they needed space, that you were suffocating them, that relationships are just not their thing, those reasons feel hollow now, when there's actually nothing there. When they actually have all the space in the world and it doesn't feel like freedom, it feels like loneliness. It feels like the consequence of pushing away the one person who loved them. And here's the thing that the psychology tells us. Avoidant individuals grow and change through loss, not through pressure. All the explaining, all the pleading, all the trying to make them understand, that reinforced their defenses because it gave them something to push against. But loss is different. Loss is quiet. Loss is undeniable. Loss is the absence of the thing you took for granted. And in that loss, growth becomes possible. This doesn't mean they'll change overnight. This doesn't mean they'll suddenly become the person you needed them to be. Avoidant patterns are deep, they're wired into the nervous system. They took a lifetime to develop, but the journey toward change has begun, and the catalyst for that journey is you. Is your absence? Is your refusal to keep playing the role they cast you in? What you should actually be doing with your time. Now, I want to pivot here and talk about something equally important. While they're sitting in their void, what are you doing? Because the silence isn't just a gift to them, it's a gift to you. And you need to be using it wisely. This is not the time to be passive. This is not the time to be waiting quietly for them to change or to come back or to finally get it. This is the time to be actively, deliberately, intentionally building your life. Because the person who heals and grows and becomes more whole during this period, that person is untouchable. That person is not waiting. That person is too busy becoming. First, you're grieving. Let yourself do that. Don't skip this step because you think you should be over it by now. Grief is love with nowhere to go. You loved this person, you cared deeply, you tried hard. Of course you're grieving. Sit with that, write about it, cry about it, talk about it. Let your body process what your mind is trying to accept. But you're also rebuilding. You're reconnecting with the parts of yourself that you set aside to accommodate their emotional limitations. What did you love before you knew them? What brought you joy? What lit you up? Go back to those things. Not as a distraction from the pain, but as a genuine reclamation of your own life. Take a class, start a hobby, spend time with friends who consistently show up for you. Notice how different it feels to be with people who don't make you question your worth. That's a crucial lesson. You're also setting new standards, not standards for them or for who might come next, but standards for yourself. What do you want to demand from your life now? What are you not willing to accept anymore? This is where you take what you learned in that painful relationship and you translate it into wisdom. You're not doing this to punish yourself or to build walls. You're doing this to protect something precious, your own heart. And you're learning your own patterns. Because if you keep choosing avoidant people, there's something in you that's drawn to that dynamic. Maybe you grew up with an emotionally unavailable parent, and you're unconsciously trying to earn their love through the closest available proxy. Maybe you've learned that love is something you have to work hard for, fight for, convince someone to give to you. Maybe there's a part of you that believes that if you're not in pain, you're not really trying. Go with gentle curiosity toward these patterns. Not judgment. Not blame, but understanding. This is where the real transformation happens. Not in them changing, but in you becoming someone who would never again choose someone who doesn't choose you. The invisible power of your boundary. I want you to understand something that might feel counterintuitive right now. When you stopped reaching out, when you stopped trying, when you decided that your energy, your love, your emotional availability was something you needed to protect and preserve for yourself, in that moment you became more powerful in their system than you ever were when you were trying so hard. Because trying kept you engaged with them. Trying kept you hoping. Trying kept you invested in their transformation. Trying gave them power over your emotional state. But quiet is freedom. Quiet is power. Quiet is the signal that you finally believed what they've been telling you. That they don't need you. That relationships are easy to walk away from. That you don't matter that much. Except that now, you've believed it in a different way. You've believed it not as a statement about your worth, but as a statement about what you're willing to accept. You've believed it as permission to leave. And that quiet, that boundary, that final stopping of the pursuit, that is what creates the space for them to feel their own emptiness. That is what creates the conditions for them to finally notice what they had. Because you're not there to negate it, you're not there to remind them of why they push people away, you're not there to be the proof that relationships are suffocating. You're just not there. And that absence speaks louder than any words you ever said. The temptation to reach back. Now I want to speak directly to something that might be happening for you right now. You might be getting breadcrumbs, a text, a like on your post, an accidental like, a request to be friends again, an indirect message through someone else, a sudden explanation for why they did what they did, positioned as if it's for your benefit, but really it's them trying to claw their way back into relevance in your life. And you might be tempted, because hearing from them might feel like validation that your absence is working, that they're missing you. that they're finally seeing what they lost. And some part of you might want to respond, to give them one more chance, to see if maybe they've changed, if maybe your silence has been the thing that finally got through to them. But I need you to understand something. Whether they're changing or not, whether they're seeing their patterns or not, whether they're finally getting it or not, that is not your responsibility. And it's not even the point anymore. The point is you. The point is that you got out. The point is that you're healing. The point is that you finally chose yourself. If they change, that's their work to do. That's their journey to go on. That's their responsibility to themselves and to whoever comes next in their life. It's not your job to stick around and witness it. It's not your job to be there when they finally get it, as if your presence throughout all their not getting it wasn't already too much. You don't owe them a second chance. You don't owe them your time while they do the work they should have done already. You don't owe them anything. And the temptation to reach back, to explain, to help them understand what they're feeling or what their patterns mean, that's just the old dynamic trying to pull you back in. That's the familiar choreography trying to continue. It feels loving, but it's actually just another form of abandoning yourself. It's you saying, once again, that their emotional journey is more important than your peace. Stay quiet, not to punish them, but to protect yourself, not to make them see, but to honor the fact that you finally started to see, finally started to understand that you deserve better. Stay quiet so that your healing can continue. Stay quiet so that you can actually move forward instead of staying suspended in a space between hope and despair. Stay quiet so that the mirror you've created can work its slow, quiet magic on them, while you go about the business of becoming the person you're meant to be without them. How to recognize genuine change versus loneliness. But let's get real about something. Eventually, they might reach out, not with a breadcrumb, not with a test, but with something that looks like it might be genuine. They might talk about therapy. They might acknowledge what they did. They might say they've been thinking about you and realizing things. And one of the hardest things you'll have to do is figure out if this is genuine change, or if this is just them being lonely. Here's the difficult truth. Loneliness can masquerade as insight. Someone can be genuinely miserable without having genuinely changed. They can miss you without understanding why they pushed you away. They can say things that sound like growth, while still operating from the same defensive patterns underneath. Real change shows up differently. It's quiet, it's consistent, it doesn't make grand promises. Someone who's actually looking at their patterns doesn't come back with a full explanation and apology immediately. They come back slowly, carefully, with humility about how much they still have to learn. They don't expect forgiveness, they don't ask for a chance. They simply acknowledge that they were part of the problem, that they understand that now, and that they're working on it. But also, and this is crucial, real change in them doesn't actually require anything from you. They're not changing so you'll come back. They're not changing so you'll validate their progress. They're changing because they finally realize they need to. And if they're really changing, they'll understand why you don't come back. They'll understand that you don't owe them anything. They'll be genuinely glad that you were able to leave and build something better. Loneliness, on the other hand, comes with an expectation. There's often a subtle, or not so subtle, message of, now come back because I finally see what I lost. There's a feeling of, I've done enough work, now you should give me a chance. There's an underlying belief that your absence was the worst punishment, and that now that they've acknowledged it, you should be ready to re-enter their life. The difference is not always crystal clear. Sometimes it's a combination. Someone can genuinely be growing while also being lonely and hoping you'll come back. So here's what you need to do. You need to look at what they're actually saying and doing, not what you hope it means. You need to check in with yourself about what you actually want. Do you want to be with this person again? Or do you want to believe that your absence was so profound that they've finally transformed? Because those are two very different things. And most importantly, you need to be honest about this. Even if they have genuinely changed, you don't have to go back. You don't have to be the person they practice their new skills on. You don't have to give them a second chance just because they've finally done the internal work. They had their chance, they had multiple chances, they made their choices. And you made yours. What not to do when they reach back out? I want to be very specific about this because it's important. When they reach out, and there's a good chance they will, here are the things you absolutely should not do. Don't engage with the narrative. They will want to explain. They will want to tell you their story of what they've realized. They will want to have conversations about what happened. Don't do this. Not because you're being cruel, but because this is exactly the dance you're trying to exit. The moment you start engaging with their explanation, their insight, their newfound understanding, you're back in the dynamic where their emotional process becomes your responsibility. Don't validate or invalidate. Don't tell them, "I'm glad you're finally seeing this," and don't tell them that's not good enough. Both of these responses place you in a position of authority over their growth. Both of them make it about you and your judgment. Just stay out of it. Don't make promises about the future. Don't say maybe someday or I'm just not ready yet, because both of these leave the door open. Both of them give them something to hope for. Both of them keep you half committed to a fantasy. You can say, "I wish you well in your growth," and that can be the end of the sentence. Don't accept explanations for what happened. Because explanations will feel like closure, like finally understanding why they did what they did, and that understanding can feel like permission to forgive them. But understanding why someone hurt you and forgiving them are not the same thing. You can understand their patterns without deciding that they deserve another chance. Don't try to be friends, at least not soon. Not until you've had enough time and distance that their presence in your life is genuinely neutral. Right now, friendship is just another way to stay connected. It's another way to keep the door open. It's another way to stay suspended in the space where they might change. Let there be actual separation. Let there be actual distance. Let enough time pass that you can see them without feeling anything. Don't explain yourself. When they ask why you won't give them another chance, why you've moved on, why you won't accept their apology, don't explain. Your silence should continue here. You don't owe them an explanation for protecting yourself. You don't owe them a detailed roadmap of your feelings and reasons and the point at which you decided you were done. They'll want this because explanation is engagement, but you're not engaging anymore. The transformation that's happening in you, while they're sitting in the discomfort of their own patterns, you need to know what's happening to you. You're healing. Not in the Instagram quote way, where healing is a destination you reach and then you're done, but in the real way, where healing is a process of slowly, incrementally, day by day, reclaiming yourself. You're learning what it feels like to have your own back. You're learning that you can survive the loss of someone you loved. You're learning that your worth is not determined by someone else's capacity to see it. You're learning that silence is not always rejection. Sometimes silence is self-preservation. Sometimes silence is love directed towards yourself instead of towards someone else who won't receive it. You're learning that you can take care of your own heart, that you can be responsible for your own emotional well-being, that you don't need someone else's affirmation to know that you matter. And as these things become integrated into who you are, something shifts. You start to take up more space in your own life. You start to invest in relationships that actually nourish you. You start to notice when you're falling into old patterns with other people, and you stop yourself. You start to understand that your willingness to love deeply is not a flaw that needs to be fixed. It's a strength that needs to be protected. It's something sacred that should only be offered to people who can receive it with gratitude and reciprocity. The distance you've created isn't only creating a mirror for them, it's creating a mirror for you too. And in that mirror, you're beginning to see clearly. You're beginning to see that you were always enough. That you were always worthy of someone who wanted to be close to you. That you were always deserving of a relationship that didn't require you to shrink yourself down or negotiate your needs, or convince someone that you mattered. And that's the real story here. That's the narrative that matters. Not whether they're finally seeing their patterns, but that you're finally seeing yours. Not whether they're in pain because of your absence, but that you're in freedom because of it. Not whether they're regretting what they lost, but that you're building something they can never have. A life where you're not waiting for someone else to be ready. A life where you're not hoping that eventually they'll change. A life where you're simply, finally, fully present for yourself. The long game of transformation, I want to tell you what often happens in the months and years ahead. And I want you to know this so that you're prepared. So that you don't let false hope creep back in at the crucial moment when things actually do shift in them. Sometimes, avoidant people do begin to change. Sometimes the silence does what years of talking couldn't do. Sometimes they finally start to look at themselves. And when they do, sometimes they try to come back. Sometimes they reach out, not with breadcrumbs, but with actual effort. Sometimes they apologize. Sometimes they explain. Sometimes they talk about therapy, about how they're finally understanding their patterns, about how they want to try again. And here's what I need you to know. Even if all of this happens, you don't have to take them back. You don't have to give them another chance. You don't have to be the person who validates that their change is real, or that they've learned their lesson. You don't have to serve as the test case for whether they can actually show up emotionally. That is not your job. That is not your responsibility. That is not your purpose. They created the distance, they made the choices, they built the patterns. And yes, your absence may have been the thing that made it possible for them to finally look at those patterns. That's beautiful. That's growth. That's healing. But it doesn't erase what happened. It doesn't rewrite the history of how they treated you. It doesn't mean that you owe them an opportunity to do better. The real transformation, the one that matters for your life, is the one where you don't have to wonder if you made the right choice. It's the one where you don't have to hope that they finally figured it out. It's the one where you're so busy building your own beautiful, connected, healthy life that whether they're changing or not becomes almost irrelevant. You'll be happy. They'll either work on themselves or they won't. And you'll be okay with both outcomes, because neither outcome dictates your worth or your future. In fact, here's something beautiful that happens when you really let go. You actually become able to be genuinely glad for them if they do change. Not because you're hoping they'll come back. Not because you want them to do well so that you can feel better about your choice. But just because they're another human being who's found their way to some healing. And that's a kind of freedom too. The freedom to wish someone well without needing them in your life. The freedom to hope they grow without hoping they grow back toward you. The power of staying true. What you've done requires more courage than you probably realize. Staying silent when you want to reach out, staying gone when you want to explain, staying firm in your boundary when they start to shift and maybe show signs of understanding. These things require a kind of strength that isn't celebrated in our culture. We celebrate the grand gesture, the person who goes back again and again, the person who loves unconditionally and never gives up. We celebrate persistence, even when persistence is just a prettier word for refusing to accept reality. But what I'm celebrating is your quiet choice. Your decision to respect yourself enough to walk away. Your commitment to your own healing, even if it means letting go of the fantasy that they might change. Your refusal to be the person who holds space for their transformation. Your willingness to trust that you're enough right now without needing them to finally see it. This is revolutionary. In a world that tells women especially that their job is to love men through their dysfunction, that their love can heal anyone, that they should never give up on a relationship, that they should always try harder, be more patient, understand better. Your quiet refusal is revolutionary. Your boundary is not selfish. It's necessary. It's the line that distinguishes between love and self-abandonment. It's the moment where you finally realize that you cannot be responsible for another person's emotional growth. And the beautiful part, the thing that I want you to really let sink in, your silence is a gift to them. Even if they never thank you for it. Even if they spend the rest of their life not quite getting why you left and never came back. Your silence is a gift. It's the gift of finally being left alone with their own stuff. It's the gift of no longer having someone to blame. It's the gift of finally having the space to grow. And whether they use that gift or not is entirely their choice. The healing room wisdom. So here's what I want you to take with you as you move forward. The avoidant person in your life is experiencing something right now. Maybe they're miserable. Maybe they're confused. Maybe they're beginning to see their patterns. Maybe they're reaching out in small ways. Maybe they're moving on as if you never existed. Any of these things is possible. All of these things are out of your control. But you know what you can control. You, your healing, your boundaries, your commitment to yourself. Your refusal to go back to the dynamic that was hurting you. Your willingness to believe that you deserve someone who shows up. Your dedication to becoming more whole, more integrated, more at peace with yourself and your choices. That's what you control, and that's what matters. The silence you've created is powerful. Don't use it to manipulate them or punish them or wait for them to come back changed and perfect. Use it to heal, use it to grieve. Use it to learn who you are without someone else's emotional needs taking up all your space. Use it to rebuild your relationship with yourself. Use it to understand your own patterns, not so you can blame yourself, but so you can make different choices in the future. Use it to connect with other people who can meet you with warmth and consistency. Use it to remember what it feels like to be at peace. And if they change, you'll probably hear about it eventually. And you'll be happy for them the way you might be happy for anyone whose life is improving. But it won't shake you, because you're not waiting for their transformation to validate your choice. You're not holding on to hope that they'll come back different. You're building something so solid in yourself that what they do or don't do becomes almost secondary. That is the real power. That is the real victory. That is what your silence has given you the space to become. You are worthy of presence. You are worthy of consistency. You are worthy of being chosen, not tolerated. You are worthy of being someone's priority, not their option. And the fact that you finally believe that, finally lived as though you believed that, finally protected that belief by stepping away from someone who was teaching you otherwise, that is everything. That is the healing. That is the transformation. The silence they're feeling is the consequence of their own patterns. The peace you're feeling is the reward of your own courage. And in this moment, as you're reading this or listening to this, I want you to know that you did the right thing. Not because it will fix them, but because it saved you.